So, what is Star Renegades? Well, it's a roguelite made by developer Massive Damage with what I would describe as turn management styled combat. You play with a team of up to 5 of the titular Star Renegades, a ragtag bunch attempting to put a stop to an interdimensional army controlled by an AI known as Mother. Most Rogue-esque games, when they attempt to attach lore to the repeated looping gameplay, tend to focus more on temporal or resurrection ideas, but in Star Renegades, when you lose, the dimension is just doomed, and your little helper robot J5 leaves that reality and moves on to the next to try and defend this new reality from suffering the same fate. While this has no bearing on the gameplay, it does make your losses hit a little harder, and it's nice to see a fresh take on the story concept. Now, once your little robot enters a new dimension, the run starts by picking 3 members of the Star Renegades to comprise your team. They come from a variety of different backgrounds, but you'll be choosing them based around making a balanced team composition. Some of the Renegades are big damage dealers, others tanks. Some have supportive skills or have high speeds and status effects, while some sit comfortably in more neutral roles. The kicker is that while you can have up to 5 party members, here you can only pick 3, ensuring that your team cannot be perfectly balanced. After picking your starter team, you set out to defend 3 different planets, each containing an ancient heart of a Titan that the opposing force needs to power their warring campaign. The gameplay herein can then be broken up into 2 different reoccurring phases: a breach phase, where you move about the planet's overworld, and a combat phase, where you fight the enemies you encounter. For the breach phase, you start on the outskirts of the area where the Titan heart is located. This place is well defended and broken up into different randomly generated zones, each with a different encounter. Some have battles against the interdimensional army, some have permanent stat upgrades for a character of your choice, some have money, while others can have turret hazards that damage you but increase post-battle rewards, or powerful enemy generals that guarantee equipment drops. There are quite a large number of zones in these areas, but at most you can breach into 9, split up into 3 for each day. After each day, you are given a brief moment to heal and buff your allies in a camp section. Each character has their own unique camp skills, much like their combat skills, and characters also have bonding levels. Once this level goes up between 2 units, they can bolster each other's stats, are granted powerful combo attacks, and between certain characters, the ability to create progenies, adding new members to the Star Renegades roster for future runs of the game. In a lot of ways, the breach phase needs to be considered into your team composition just as much as the combat phase. When camping ends and the next day begins, you'll find that certain pre-indicated zones have been blocked off, so choosing where to go and what encounters best serve to strengthen your team are the strategy of these overworld choices. Now, after breaching into most zones, the game shifts to the combat phase. These are the fights I described as having a turn management styled version of turn-based combat. I put it like so because a round of combat plays out in one long motion of both allies and enemies, rather than the you go they go of traditional turn-based combat. Before a turn starts, however, all the enemy actions are displayed, showing who they'll target, what their attack will do, and when their attack will take place on the turn timeline. From there, you choose attacks that best suit the situation, and each of the characters have attacks that suit different purposes. Things like armor shred or status effects, or redirecting enemy attacks to a different ally. 2 big metrics that affect combat are the speed of an attack and the delay some attacks provide. Attacking earlier than your target on the turn timeline provides one with a critical hit, granting bonus effects and damage to your current attack. But stronger attacks tend to be slower, initiating later on the timeline, making crits hard to get. The delay mechanic can push an enemy further back on the timeline, letting your hard hitters do all the damage they can. And there's also another benefit. Delay the enemy enough and their action will be delayed all the way into the next turn, letting you put off powerful enemy attacks until they can be better dealt with. This cannot be done indefinitely though, as there is a limit on how many attacks will delay an enemy, with that number decreasing the more you do it, but increasing if you leave them be. Enemies can also try and mitigate your usage of this by using delay-proof attacks, blocking for other units, and doing attacks so big they cannot be ignored. Your units also have their own responses to those in the form of stuns and guard breaks and the like, further putting significance of who you include on your team. After expending the cycle of breach and battle phases on a planet, the game moves you to the planet's boss fight against a mechanical behemoth. While only a single unit, you'll find they have more wide-area attacks and attacks with special effects than you'd normally counter with regular enemies. The amount of armor they have is also exorbitantly high, so lacking an armor shred makes them relatively invincible. Defeat the behemoth of one planet, and then the cycle begins again on the next, though now with more zones and new enemy types. After liberating all 3 planets, the run concludes on a fight in the enemy's mothership. This portion forgoes the breach phase and instead puts you in a series of consecutive battles leading up to the final boss, all the while escorting the little robot J5, who now takes up the final 6th slot on your team, but is completely defenseless in battle, creating a whole new set of challenges as you try and protect him all the way through these final fights. Now this game has a couple interesting roguelike-y ideas within its entirety, beyond just normal randomized loot drops and the like. One such idea is the way enemy generals are handled. Each general is randomly assigned things like appearance and personality, along with unique battle factors like immunities to certain attack types or status effects, or weaknesses of the same regard, ensuring each fight is never the same. But more so than that is how they are handled between different runs. If, say for instance, a general runs away or you're defeated by one, they don't just get rerolled with someone new the next time you start up. Instead, you'll find they get promoted, gaining in power and becoming an even greater challenge in subsequent runs. This goes until they are defeated, but even then you may find they return as a random event of sorts. The whole method behind these generals and their various quirks and management isn't some arbitrary system either. It's actually based on the Nemesis system present in the Middle-earth games. It's not quite as in-depth as its first-party counterpart, but I think it's notable as one of the first games that have attempted utilizing it at all, and it certainly fits into the roguelike formula quite well. The other interesting gameplay concept here takes place after a run is successfully completed. The final boss, after spending so many painstaking attempts trying to defeat him, does not remain as the final boss. Instead, after his defeat, he's replaced, not by some random faceless enemy, but a twisted version of one of the Star Renegades. So you get as many different final boss fights as there are Star Renegades, which is not an insignificant amount. But this isn't the only change. The person who gets set as the final boss also becomes unusable as part of your team. This creates an interesting dynamic where characters that you may prefer and rely on disappear, requiring you to try out completely different strategies. And the characters that are now gone have their unique quirks and abilities jacked up to the max as the new final boss. This ensures that you have a fresh experience every time you play, for at least one go around of the roster in any case. The developers have also declared their intent to add more Renegades and Behemoths to the game, which will further these types of unique runs. Now there is one other thing I'd like to talk about in regards to the roguelike systems. This game is technically a roguelite, meaning that it contains permanent unlockable upgrades you can purchase with currency gained during runs, which in this case are a mix of level tiers and currencies gained through combat. You can then use these to unlock new members of the Renegades to choose in your starting team, get new starting buffs for each of them as well, and you can get new team-wide bonuses and add more equipment to the potential drop pool, as well as picking a free one to start with. But despite having all these upgrades, they don't have the same impact on a run than compared to, say, Hades, where you rack up improved stats and the like that make you harder to kill and do more damage. For instance, the starting bonus for all characters is receiving increased bonding points, which if you remember, bonding levels grant bolstered stats and powerful combo moves. Increasing bonding points means you get those buffs earlier and between more characters, which can be just as impactful as, say, a starting buff that increases damage. And the starting team-wide bonus is doling out small amounts of free money and experience points, which even those meager amounts could be the difference between a higher leveled character or a powerful equipment purchase. And the large swath of equipment you can unlock are still found randomly in the game, so you don't have any tangible gain there. At most, you get the single freebie of your choice at the start, but the idea that a weak level 1 weapon could shift the outcome of the entire game is a bit of a stretch. Only the character unlocks have some real impact. You can use this to set up a team with more preferential choices, but even then you are still under the restrictions of not being able to create a fully balanced party, and the rotating final boss concept changes the optimal choices each and every time, limiting the benefit those choices provide. So with all these different unlocks feeling more like trade-offs rather than a steady increase in power, you can see why I say the game errs more to the roguelike side of things rather than the roguelite side, as your skill at playing ultimately outweighs any upgrade. Now, supplementing all this gameplay, you'll find that Star Renegades has a fairly decent soundtrack. It's not one of my personal favorites, but it isn't bad by any extent, and the art, especially a lot of the animated backgrounds, are expertly crafted, with inspiration clearly derived from the 2D, 3D stylings of Octopath Traveler. And I'm also happy to say there have been no major problems or buggy mishaps in my time with the game. I did take issue with things like the random location interactions not always making sense, the slow map movement where you're also prone to getting stuck on objects, which is especially painful when crossing multiple zones, and the click boxes in battle can be a little finicky at times, but none of these really affect the meat of the game. They are just rather consistent inconveniences. Inconveniences that I imagine could be easily changed in an update, and given the developer has already announced their content update schedule, such changes likely aren't that far off. Plus, a constant stream of new content means that things won't get boring anytime soon. So if you're looking for a roguelite with lots of strategy and an interesting take on normal turn-based battles that won't become a breeze to beat after investing a little time like other roguelites, then I suggest you give Star Renegades a try.